Happy Monday, everyone. I hope you had a great weekend. I hope you had a time away from social media and in real life and outside of the matrix of information and emotion and everything that's happening in the political realm. But now you're back. So let's talk about all those things that you avoided over the weekend. And today, our two topics are Trump's new actions in the Ukraine-Russia war. I'm going to give you an update on what just happened this morning, why it matters, and why this marks a shift in Trump's approach on the Ukraine-Russia conflict, and a continuation of the Epstein debacle, crisis, controversy. Not sure what to call it at this point, but there's been some developments over the weekend that we're going to dive into. And Trump has directly spoken out about the Epstein situation, and it merits some analysis. So let's first talk about NATO and Ukraine. It's been a while since we've talked about the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And basically, what's been happening for the last several months is Trump has been trying to broker some sort of peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. And whereas originally he was more neutral in the engagement, over the last few months, he's become more and more vocally critical of Putin, essentially saying that he's trying to make a deal, but Putin says he talks nice, but then bombs everyone. That's what he said, almost verbatim. So recently, Trump announced a new deal. Trump went on a tour of Europe, and during that tour, he got other NATO allies to agree to increase the amount that they spend on their own defense, which, as an American, I consider quite nice because America has actually been paying a disproportionate share of the NATO defense costs for years now, and Trump has been writing the arrangement. Trump just announced that he is also going to be selling NATO and Ukraine more Patriot missiles for the defense of Ukraine in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Now, for those of you who don't know what Patriot missiles are, there's, of course, different types of missiles for different occasions. Patriot missiles are almost entirely defensive. And the reason this is relevant is because Putin has been stepping up his missile and drone attacks on Ukraine. So Trump is selling these Patriot missiles, but he has said that all of the cost of these missiles will be borne by NATO, the European Union, and by proxy, Ukraine. So it's offering support through American military technology, but the cost of it actually goes to Europe, which, in my personal opinion, is a good way to thread the needle, because I think many Americans were tired of paying for this conflict that has, at best, secondary consequences for the US. And we spent over $100 billion so far on the conflict. And this is Trump saying, hey, he's still going to back Ukraine, but it's not going to come at the expense of the American taxpayers. He is also threatened to put in place 100% tariffs on Russia if they do not reach a peace deal in 50 days. And that 100% tariff doesn't just apply to US-Russia direct trades, but also any trades that other nations are making with Russia. So, for example, if China wants to sell, let's say, drones to Russia, the US would impose tariffs so that there's a second order impact on Russia. So it's not just a first order tariff, it's under the second order tariff as well. So why is this relevant? First, it's because Trump is basically trying to signal that he is more aligned with Ukraine. If push comes to shove, he's more aligned with Ukraine. He's also signaling to Putin he is willing to invest in the resistance against what the war that Putin started, but he is not willing to spend American money on it necessarily. And this is, in my opinion, a deft move because it signals that, hey, we still have this alliance, because despite all of the let's say, verbal sparring matches that Trump has gotten into with other world leaders, particularly Canada and the EU, he's signaling that we're still more ideologically aligned with the EU than we are with Russia. So one might ask, okay, well, why are we still involved at all? Like, why even sell Ukraine missiles? Well, the argument would go like this. Ultimately, one can make arguments about NATO expanding eastward and that triggering Putin to eventually assault Ukraine. One can make arguments about Ukraine mistreating ethnic Russians in the eastern part of Ukraine and that giving Putin the impetus to act. But ultimately, by invading Ukraine, Putin threatens to upset the international order. Because if Putin can just choose to invade Ukraine, well, what does that signal to other nations around the world? And I think if I were Trump, I would be looking at the big picture and I would say, okay, well, if Putin is allowed to invade Ukraine without resistance and America was originally backing Ukraine, does that signal to, for example, Xi Jinping, who, of course, is the head of state for China, to invade Taiwan? Because it's saying, okay, well, America, we're not all in on the defense of allies or nations that at least are protected ideologically because they're more aligned with America than Russia or China is. So he's trying to weave a balance, right? Because he still has to maintain this America first brand, but he still wants to back Ukraine because he recognizes that there's a domino effect. Or so I speculate. So to recap, Trump basically gave another ultimatum to Putin and said, hey, after 50 days, we are going to get more involved, not militarily, but economically. There's going to be a 100% tariff on any Russian exports. And we're going to penalize any country trading with Russia. So the big picture bet is that Trump squeezing Russia economically is going to push Putin to the table without escalating U.S. military involvement further, because there is likely not the political will to be involved militarily. And this is a relatively dramatic shift. I mean, you'll recall that not too long ago, people were accusing Trump of being Putin's puppets and aligned with Putin and supporting authoritarian dictatorships across the world. But now, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that he is not that. He is willing to oppose Putin, but not at any cost, unlike the Biden administration, which was willing to open the pocketbook for the defense of Ukraine. So this maintains some strategic ambiguity, some political calculation. It allows Trump to take an adversarial position toward Putin, but it dodges the optics of U.S. taxpayers funding another forever war. It also signals to Europe that, hey, the responsibility for taking care of things in your region is going to increasingly fall on you. And this has been something that Trump has been consistent about since he entered office. U.S. allies must pay their fair share. So we're willing to give them access to American military might, but we're not going to do it at our expense, which of course is going to trigger European nations to start to spend more money on their own defense budgets, which in my personal view is healthy. I mean, we can have alliances with people without making ourselves complicit in fighting every war on their borders. And ultimately, NATO's involvement here isn't direct, right? Because Ukraine is actually part of NATO. Part of what triggered this, in fact, was Biden openly signaling that he wanted Ukraine to join NATO, which some would argue was the last straw for Putin because he drew a bright line around Ukraine joining NATO. And I'm not speaking normatively, I'm just speaking of what was said. The European point of view on things is, well, if Ukraine falls, then who's going to be next? If Ukraine falls, it's an indication of Putin's interest in reconstituting the Soviet Union, because Ukraine used to be part of the Soviet Union, along with Russia and Poland and other nations. Now, of course, we need to demarcate things after Ukraine, because the other nations that used to be part of the Soviet Union, like Poland, for example, are in NATO. But the concern among Europeans is that this will start a domino effect, and if Putin takes Ukraine, he's not going to stop there. Now, me personally, this is just giving Kaizen's opinion, I have not been sold on the fact that this is directly related to America's first order interests in the first place. I could see it being related to our second order interests if Russia is gaining more power and allowed to run roughshod over Europe. That destabilizes the overall balance of power. But I'm not particularly concerned that it's going to be Ukraine, and then it's going to be Poland, and this is going to be all of Europe, and then Russia's going to turn their sights on America, which is what Zelensky said in that press conference. You guys remember way back in February. I don't think that's actually going to happen. I'm not personally concerned about that. But I do think it makes sense to exert American influence against our rivals with some clear restraints around to the extent to which we will get involved. And I think economically is a fine place to get involved. It's fine to impose sanctions, because ultimately, yeah, we don't want a world where countries are invading other countries without direct provocation and without any consequences for them too. But I think the biggest thing that I want is just peace. I mean, just as a human being, the Russia-Ukraine conflict has been the bloodiest conflict, I think, of the 21st century. Um, Ironically, I mean, right now, Israel-Palestine is what gets the most attention, but Ukraine-Russia completely dwarfs Israel-Palestine in terms of the number of casualties. I believe it's in excess of 1 million people by now. It's actually quite insane. And this has been going on for the better part of 3 years now. So I would like to see this come to an end. And I think if you look at from Trump's perspective, his perspective was not just that he wants to end U.S. involvement in forever wars, but he wants to end wars, period. And it makes a lot of sense if you look at it from his perspective, because any war is destabilizing his economic agenda, because war is not good for the economy globally. So the sooner this thing ends, the better. And of course, from a humanitarian standpoint, we don't want to see Russian people or Ukrainian people dying because of the interests of elites who are controlling these countries. So ultimately, TLDR is Trump is selling Patriot missiles to NATO. NATO is going to be using those Patriot missiles in defense of Ukraine. Those Patriot missiles are defensive. They're not offensive, generally speaking. This is signaling America's commitment to supporting the West meaning NATO, European Union, and tangentially Ukraine. And after 50 days, if there's not a peace deal, then sanctions will also be levied against Russia and anyone trading with Russia. Cool. So that's pretty much it. Pretty much by the book. Let me see what you guys think before we jump on to the juiciest topic of today, which is going to be Epstein, of course. Don't blame the voice says diplomacy can be very convoluted. It can. And I actually think that Trump is doing a good job so far on the Ukraine-Russia conflict. I am disappointed that the conflict has not ended already. And Trump did say, I'm going to end it before I even get into office. Well, now we're 6 months in. It's obviously not ended. But overall, I do like what I've been seeing from Trump. I like that he's being even-handed. I like that he's not clearly just taking a side. He's taking the side of peace, not Ukraine or Russia. But yeah, it can be a convoluted process. And it's interesting to watch everything unfold in real time. So let's hope that by the end of 50 days, there is a peace deal and enough pressure has been created on Russia for that to happen. Oh, and you might be wondering, okay, well, why hasn't a peace deal happened already? Well, there's not an agreement, I think primarily, I mean, outside of some people being suspicious that Putin just doesn't want the war to end. And some people are suspicious that Zelensky doesn't want the war to end for that matter. But based on what we know for a fact, there's not agreement on what territories Russia has to either relinquish or gets to keep as the spoils of the war that they started. So yeah, there's much of eastern Ukraine has been captured at this point. And from Zelensky's point of view, that's Ukraine. It should be returned to Ukraine. Even Crimea, I've heard him say that he wants to return to Ukraine. And from Putin's position, they're ethnic Russians there. He has a historical right to that land. And I think from it's a power position, he doesn't have to give away that land because he's a bigger country. I mean, has a population that's 4 times the size of Ukraine, and he can afford this war much more than Ukraine can. So Trump and NATO getting involved is the only thing that really makes this conflict something that Ukraine can even sustain. Because without Western compliance, Ukraine not only can't continue the war, they also don't have leverage to get back that territory. So that's part of the reason that this hasn't ended. Someone asked a good question, and I did mention Taiwan and China tangentially. Doe says and asks, China has a huge drone show army. You think they have other military intentions with their drone manufacturing? Yes, I do. I think, so Taiwan has been a topic of tension between the US and China for, I think, at least a decade now. And part of that is because of, let's say, national identity reasons. I mean, China considers Taiwan part of China. Many of the Taiwanese consider themselves a sovereign, independent nation. And there's just a fundamental disagreement on that fact. And then there's also geopolitical significance of Taiwan, and increasingly so, because Taiwan is the chief manufacturer of semiconductor chips. And semiconductor chips get used in electric cars, but most importantly, arguably, they get used in AI. And AI is quickly becoming not just a vector for technological supremacy, but military supremacy as well. So yeah, some of you guys have seen these drone shows with China like showing like dragons in the sky made out of drones, and it's crazy and super technologically impressive. But yes, I think that's also their way of signaling, hey, the future of warfare is drone based, and we are ahead in that future. So don't mess with us. And it's a scary sign because most of the drones that America has come from China right now because China's way ahead on drone manufacturing. So our supply lines for something that could be used in a hot war is reliant on our biggest rival. And just to be clear, our biggest rival is not Russia. It's by far it's China. Um, Economically, they're competitive with us. Militarily, they're competitive with us. They have nukes, just like we do. So it's not even clear that America's still the number one. If it would come to a conflict, it's more like a 1A, 1B situation. I think China recognizes that, and I think they're signaling that to us through their drone shows. It's a show of Chinese supremacy. So, great question. Thank you for all the people who are sharing and reposting the stream. I appreciate you getting the words out. Okay. YouTube is not sending you notifications when you go live. Oh, I'm sorry about that. I'm not sure why. I haven't changed any settings on YouTube, so I'm not sure if things changed or if it never was sending notifications. So thanks for finding the stream regardless. Okay, so enough of that. Let's talk about Epstein. Now, to catch everyone up on what's been going on for the last several weeks. Actually, you know what? Let's even go back several months. So in September of 2024, last year, Trump did an interview with the famous podcaster Lex Fridman. And on that interview, Lex essentially asked Trump, would you be willing to release the rest of the Epstein files? And Trump said, yeah, look into it. And he signaled an openness to that. Fast forward to Trump getting elected. Trump appointed Pam Bondi as the Attorney General. Pam Bondi made I think it's objectively fair to say, big show and spectacle around releasing the Epstein files. And in interviews, she was saying, yes, the Epstein list is on my desk. She's now saying that she misspoke, but that's what she said in the interview. She indicated that there was some big news that was going to be revealed in the Epstein files, that they had evidence of heinous acts, that there were many names implicated. And then a few weeks ago, they announced that they have no Epstein list. They have no additional evidence that would lead to the prosecution of the people involved in abusing these children alongside Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And basically, we're done. There's nothing else. And I think it's fair to say, regardless of your beliefs on what was in the Epstein files versus what was not, people were extremely disappointed. And for some people, that disappointment manifested as anger and suspicion. Some people believe that now Trump is part of a cover-up, that he is protecting the people who are named in the Epstein list and that the Epstein list still exists, contrary to Pam Bondi saying that no such list exists. And it's caused a huge rift within the Trump America First MAGA movement. And I would say this has actually been the biggest rift that I've seen since at least I started paying attention to what Trump was doing, and certainly since he got elected president for his second term. And there are sort of two camps of people. There's a camp that says, okay, we're disappointed, but we trust Trump, and we're going to put this down to bad messaging and mismanaged expectations. And then there's another camp who is suspicious, saying Trump is part of a cover-up and is demanding more transparency. And then actually, no, it's not fair to say that. There's probably a third camp that is not directly accusing Trump of being part of a cover-up, but is saying that there is a cover-up, and at minimum, Trump has a responsibility to reveal who's behind it, because Epstein and people who raped kids have not been brought, or Epstein has, but the other people who have participated in this pedophile ring have not been brought to justice. And I think Tucker Carlson, who's one of the most visible Trump supporters and now Trump critics, particularly on the Epstein case, has been speaking out about this. And I want you to hear Tucker Carlson's take.
acceptable. And I think the real answer is Jeffrey Epstein was working on behalf of intel services, probably not American. And we have every right to ask, on whose behalf was he working? How does a guy go from being a math teacher at the Dalton School in the late 70s with no college degree to having multiple airplanes, a private island, and the largest residential house in Manhattan? Where did all the money come from? And no one has ever gotten to the bottom of that because no one has ever tried. And moreover, it's extremely obvious to anyone who watches that this guy had direct connections to a foreign government. Now, no one's allowed to say that that foreign government is Israel because we have been somehow cowed into thinking that that's naughty. There is nothing wrong with saying that. There is nothing hateful about saying that. There's nothing anti-Semitic about saying that. There's nothing even anti-Israel about saying that. I've spent my entire life pretty much in Washington, where I knew and loved a number of people, including one very close person who worked at CIA. That has never prohibited me from saying, I think the CIA has done some horrible things, murdered a bunch of people, participated in the murder of a sitting US president. It's got a whole trail of crimes. That doesn't make me a disloyal American. It doesn't make me anti-American in any sense. I was born here. My family's been here for hundreds of years. I love this country. That's why I live here. So criticizing the behavior of a government agency does not make you a hater. It makes you a free person. It makes you a citizen. You're allowed to do that because you're not a slave. You're a citizen. And you have a right to expect that your government will not act against your interests, and you have a right to demand that foreign governments not be allowed to act against your interest. That's not creepy. It shouldn't be forbidden. And yet all of us have trained ourselves to believe that you can't say that somehow.
So Tucker Carlson has critiques of Israel, and he thinks that they're involved in the Epstein case. He thinks that they're involved in maybe making him an intelligence asset that they use to blackmail people, compose the Epstein list, and that they're pulling the strings and that the American people need to know. Now, personally, I don't know. I do think that Israel has too much influence over the American government. And I think that got revealed when a few weeks ago, Texas Senator Ted Cruz said in an interview, he thinks that he has a biblical imperative to support the state of Israel. Now, it's fine for Ted Cruz to have his own personal beliefs informed by his interpretation of the Bible. I don't have any issue with that. My concern is that there are many senators who are deeply ideologically committed to the support of Israel rather than strategically committed to supporting Israel because it's America first. And there is a difference. And I do think that there have been cases, for example, last year where Congress passed a bill in the House making it illegal to criticize the government of Israel in certain cases. Now, fortunately, that bill never made it to the Senate, and I don't know what happened to the bill. I don't know if it just sort of died died in transition there. But when I see that as an American, I become very concerned. Not because I dislike Israel, not because I dislike Jews. I love Jewish people, and Israel, I don't really have any real thoughts or impressions of it. I've never been there. I have concerns about enshrining critiques of other foreign governments as problematic within our local laws. That doesn't make any sense to me. So I think it's fair for Tucker to criticize the relationship between the American government and Israel more generally, especially in light of what's going on in Gaza, right? Because regardless of how you feel about the Palestine movement or the Israel movement, I think at minimum one could say that, hey, the way that Israel is going about this conflict is not the way that America would go about prosecuting the conflict if we were in that situation. And we know that because we were in a very similar situation before, right? We invaded Iraq and Afghanistan. We too were involved in urban warfare, dealing with guerrillas who were embedded with the civilian populace. But we did not endlessly carpet bomb Iraq or Afghanistan. We actually sent troops on the ground to surgically strike. And why did we do that? Well, in part, we did that so that we can minimize civilian casualties. So I think there are reasonable criticisms one could have of the state of the government of Israel, even if you ideologically are aligned with them or support their right to defend themselves, as people will say. That said, I just haven't gone down the rabbit hole on the whole Epstein Israel connection. I've seen some stuff that, yeah, there's clearly some connection, but I don't know how much of it is guilt by association versus causal. With all that said, though, and not that Tucker is saying this here, but to speak to people who are saying that Trump is part of some cover up here, I think that's the least likely of possibilities here. And this is why. So you'll recall that I said the whole origin of this was Trump getting asked in an interview whether he would be willing to make the Epstein files public disclosure. And Trump said, yeah, sure, I'm not involved, so let's do it. I'm happy to give disclosure and give the truth to the public. To me, it's highly unlikely that Trump would promise to make files available if he knew that he was in them. I think he genuinely believes, yeah, I have nothing to do with it, and I'm going to throw something to my base because they want it. I don't think this was a big deal to Trump to begin with. And I think the rhetoric that he's had around this thing since then confirms that. Because what's happening, and I think this is the biggest critique I have of Trump in this situation, is that he doesn't appear to understand why the Epstein case is so important to people years later within his base. And to me, he doesn't have motive to cover up the Epstein thing because I don't think he thinks there's something to cover up in the beginning. I think the better critique is that he's been tone deaf around the whole thing and it's really irritated a lot of people, myself included. And I want you to read this most recent comment from Trump over the weekend. This one's long, but I think it's important to read out the whole thing. He says, what's going on with my boys and in some cases, gals? Okay, so that's like a pretty cavalier way of talking about a pedophile ring case that people feel hasn't been prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. So again, tone deaf. They're all going after Attorney General Pam Bondi, who is doing a fantastic job. We're on one team, MAGA, and I don't like what's happening. We have a perfect administration, the talk of the world, and the selfish people are trying to hurt it, all over a guy who never dies, Jeffrey Epstein. Again, I think he's missing the point. He's talking about people being selfish, or you'll see as I continue here, he's talking about the left criticizing him. I don't think he realizes this is not a partisan thing. This is not about the left criticizing Trump over Epstein. This is many Americans who just want to see justice be served, who want to feel confident that we live in a country where there's justice, even if you're a billionaire, and that kids are being protected. That's the concern here. This is not like a classic case of, oh, it's just the biased media and the liberal left lunatics trying to take Trump down. No. This is something that I think is one of those issues where, fortunately, Americans are united. Hey, it's actually really important that we see justice be served here. And that's what making the files public represented. He says, why are we giving publicity to files written by Obama, Cricket, Hillary, Comey, Brennan, and the losers and criminals of the Biden administration who conned the world with the Russia hoax, 51 intelligence agents, the laptop from hell, and more? Because this is not about the left attacking Trump. That's why. It's not about the left attacking Trump. This is about adults hurting children. And also, this claim is quite strange. Files written by Obama? Is he implying that Epstein files were doctored by Obama and Hillary and the left? That doesn't sound very plausible to me. And if he's going to make a claim like that, he needs to provide evidence. Because that's a different claim than, hey, we don't have evidence. That's a claim that, hey, the evidence has been tampered with by the left. Now, again, I think this is one of those areas where I think Trump is kind of shooting from the hip, and it's just very disorganized communication and bringing in a whole bunch of irrelevant things. But I think he just fundamentally doesn't seem to understand what people are feeling, which is pretty surprising because I think that Trump actually understands the left. I think he just doesn't care. But I think he actually typically does understand the MAGA movement and how his base feels. So this is one of those times where I think he's really misreading the room here. He says, they haven't even given up on the John F. Kennedy or Martin Luther King files. No matter how much success we've had, securing the border, deporting criminals, fixing the economy, energy dominance, a safer world where Iran will not have nuclear weapons, it's never enough for some people. Yeah, well, those things, it's like, these are not fungible situations, okay? A safer world, for sure, we all want that. Deporting criminals, yeah. Secure the border, of course. Energy dominance, yes. More, please. And none of those things replace the principle of we need to protect the most vulnerable members of society, i.e., children. None of those things replace the principle of no one is above the law, especially child rapists. It doesn't matter how much money they have or who they're connected to. He goes on to say, we are about to achieve more in 6 months than any administration has achieved in over 100 years, and we have so much more to do. We are saving our country and making America great again, which will continue to be our complete priority. The left is imploding. Kash Patel and the FBI must be focused on investigating voter fraud, political corruption, Act Blue, the rigged and stolen election of 2020, and arresting thugs and criminals instead of spending month after month looking at nothing but the same old radical left-inspired documents. Again, where's this claim that it's radical left-inspired? Documents on Jeffrey Epstein. Let Pam Bondi do her job. She's great. The 2020 election was rigged and stolen, and they tried to do the same thing in 2024. That's what she's looking into as AG and much more. I would argue that this is more important than that. By the way, I would argue that the Epstein case is more important than claims of the 2024 election being stolen. So if his claim is that she needs to be more focused on the 2024 election, I would say as bad as it would be if the election was rigged, obviously, yeah, if there are people who were also molesting kids alongside Jeffrey Epstein, and that was covered up by members of our government or members of a foreign government like Israel, that is top priority. It's top priority. That needs to be something that we're devoting political resources to. He closes with saying, 1 year ago, our country was dead. Now it's the hottest country anywhere in the world. Let's keep it that way and not waste time and energy on Jeffrey Epstein, someone that nobody cares about. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Big miss. Big miss. Big miss. Like massively tone deaf. Look, as I said, if I evaluate this from first principles, it doesn't make a ton of sense for me to say that Trump is trying to cover up something because he didn't have to promise to release the Epstein files at all. He could have just easily said, yeah, I'll look into it and not done anything. Honestly, I think that, yes, I want to see justice be served, but I think Trump promising to release the Epstein files was a bonus. It's not something that him getting elected was contingent on, right? So I think that genuinely Pam Bondi took this and was like, okay, this is an easy political win for the base. Let's just walk this into the end zone here. We release these files. We create a big media spectacle of inviting a bunch of MAGA influencers to the White House. Those MAGA influencers have pictures of white binders saying the Epstein files phase 1. We can show that we're on the side of truth and transparency and justice and dethroning the deep state. I think that it was fundamentally a misread, not a cover-up. And I think that Pam Bondi's biggest mistake was promising more than she had. She hyped up a situation, but she was cashing a check that she didn't actually have, which is a big mistake because part of your job as a leader, especially with sensitive stuff like this, is to make sure that you make promises that you can keep and that you don't raise expectations above your ability to meet those expectations. So that's a big miss. But I think calling it a cover-up is possible. It's a non-zero possibility, of course. It's got to be some really immaculate, or not immaculate, more really intricate cover-up by the Trump administration. I think it's just really unlikely. However, this is what I do think is likely. I think it's likely that there was a cover-up that precedes the Trump administration getting in office. I don't know who was involved in that cover-up. I'm open to the idea that it was the CIA or Mossad, which is Israel's intelligence outfit, or some combination of the two. I'm open to that possibility. And the Trump administration is not able to penetrate that cover-up. That's what I think is more likely. And they're unwilling to devote the resources to really investigate this to the fullest extent of the law, which is disappointing because A, I think it should be investigated to the fullest extent of the law. I get that there are other important things to do, but this is part of draining the swamp, which Trump has been promising for 10 years now. So I think it's a big misread for him to say that nobody cares about this. And I'm open to the possibility that, again, that there was no Epstein list to begin with, because, again, the Epstein list was always a rumor. But Pam Bondi said herself that there were over 1,000 victims involved in this case. and that they had over 10,000 videos of child exploitation. Now, she went on to say that many of those videos were actually just child pornography that Jeffrey Epstein downloaded, which is disgusting. But if you're going to say that there's 10,000 videos and 1,000 victims, the obvious question is, wait, are we supposed to believe that it was just Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein involved in all of this? And even if one wants to say, okay, it was just Epstein and Maxwell who molested 1,000 kids, no one else knew that this was going on for 10 years. No one turned a blind eye. At minimum, no one was criminally negligent in not listening to victims or not investigating this when they got signs that something was happening, not just on Epstein's island, but on his Palm Beach estate. That is so unlikely to me that, to me, I consider it negligent for Trump to not push for the full investigation of this thing. And in not pushing for the full investigation of this thing, but even going further than that and speaking cavalierly about it, dismissing it, telling us that no one cares about it, he's actually inflaming more suspicion that he doesn't just not care, that he actually cares because he's involved in some sort of criminal conspiracy. So I think this is an L the whole way through. I think it's an L in principle, and I think it's also an L strategically. And I'm really disappointed in the Trump administration, even though I don't think that they're covering up. I think that they're negligent in not revealing who is. So real disappointment. I was really, really sad to see this message from him on Saturday. And yeah, I want people to continue to make noise about this. I don't think that people should just move on. I think that even if Trump does all the other things that he said he's going to do to make America great again, it's like, can we really be great if child exploitation is not something that we vigorously prosecute to the fullest extent of the law? To me, that's principle. It's like if we have a system that allows people to get away with raping kids because those people are rich and powerful, it's not a system worth protecting, and we need to redo the whole damn thing. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the whole Epstein situation. Curious to hear your thoughts, so let me know in the chat. Chat's more quiet today, surprisingly. I'm not sure if it's because I've already said everything that's on your mind, or maybe some people didn't get the notification, as someone mentioned on YouTube. But I am curious to hear your thoughts. In the meantime, we have Victoria, who said, absolutely nailed the MAGA feelings about Epstein victims are a bigger issue than a lost election, both to be investigated. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like the point of a civil society is it's supposed to protect people, right? Like the reason we have a civil society is to protect the most vulnerable members of society from predators, so that children are not prey. So yeah, this is like this is deeper than America. This is the reason civilization exists. So if we're not willing to deal with this, like, yes, having fair elections is of course important, but it's actually less important on the hierarchy of needs than core safety needs for people who can't defend themselves. And to express the other side, I can see why Trump, I think it can be easy to get disconnected from the interests of normal people when you're in the White House. And I can see why he would say, well, this thing happened years ago and it wasn't even on my watch. So why are people critiquing my team and my administration for not doing more? And also, he never promised that people were going to get prosecuted, right? And I think Pam Bondi, this is where she fumbled the ball, because she indicated that there was information that would lead to prosecutions and that they had names. She said, we have names, verbatim. She said, we have flight logs. That all indicated that there was going to be new information. So if Trump is not seeing everything that Pam Bondi is saying, I could see why he might feel blindsided and be like, I don't understand. Why are people making some big deal about this? This guy's been dead for years, and they've already did a full Department of Justice investigation. I was just trying to give you guys more files because you asked for it. It wasn't like some big platform in this campaign. And still, as a leader, you have to understand how people are feeling. And when people are feeling this way, you can't be dismissive of it. And I said this before, I posted this on X. If you're someone who's supportive of Trump and you like him, and in fact, you like it when he dunks on the left and calls the left names and basically makes their concerns and their viewpoints look like they're silly or deranged or lunacy or stupid, Hopefully this helps you have actually some more empathy for the left. Because if you dislike how Trump is talking about this thing and you feel like he's just being dismissive and he's not being emotionally intelligent, well, that's what he's doing toward the left all the time. That's why people say Trump is divisive. Because there's disagreement and then there's how you disagree. And this lack of care for how people, like, American citizens feel about the Epstein case and saying that nobody cares. Well, he does that to the left all the time. And I get strategically why it's an effective campaign strategy, but he's not running a campaign anymore. He's running a country, and I would like to see him stop. And it doesn't feel good when he does this to people who voted for Trump. And yeah, it also alienates and aggravates people who didn't vote for Trump. And that's part of why people protest vehemently. And no, I'm not justifying kind of violence that we just saw in LA over the ICE deportations and the Tesla terrorism and all that stuff, right? All of that stuff, like, look, Trump has not been doing violent things to American citizens. So that kind of violence it just has no place in our republic. But do you understand why people would be so emotionally agitated after years, in fact, a decade of Trump behaving in this way, that they behave that way? I want people to just understand and have empathy for the other side, because this is Trump's Achilles heel. When he disagrees, instead of saying something like, "Oh, you know what? I can see how the behaviors and the statements by me, or actually not even him so much as Attorney General Pam Bondi, could have led you to believe that there was going to be some massive hammer of justice swinging down on pedophiles in this country. And I'm sorry, we mismanaged expectations. We actually don't have that much. The promise that I made was to release the files, not to prosecute people. And you know what? This is not a promise he has to make, but it would have been nice to hear him say, you know what? We're going to look into this, because yeah, it does seem like there's some sort of cover up here, and we're going to try to get to the bottom of it. No promises, but we're actually going to devote more legal resources here. That would have been a great response. And then if you respond in an emotionally intelligent way, guess what? People are not going to be as suspicious. But when you respond dismissively, people feel uncared for. And when people feel uncared for, they get suspicious and they start buying into the idea that this is all part of a criminal conspiracy and Trump is in on it. So this is Trump reaping what he sows, and I hope people do not shut up about it. We should never shut up about it. This is important. There's no amount of time that will ever pass that makes this okay. Just like the JFK assassination, by the way, right? If a president gets killed and we don't know who it is, yeah, that's relevant for the next 50 years, 100 years, 200 years. Because why? Because you want to make sure it never happens again, right? Like, does anyone feel safer with how the Epstein case was handled, that there's not ever going to be a case of elites abusing kids? No. So we want it to be handled well, so it never needs to be handled again. And that's why people feel the way that they do. So yeah, keep making noise. Don't let this up. I don't think this is something that fundamentally invalidates everything that Trump is doing. I think this is a separate category of issues, and it is an important category of issues. And I think forever it will be a blemish on Trump's presidency until he realizes that it is a priority and it should be treated accordingly. Okay, that's about it for today, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuanced. I'll be back on Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific to break down and help make sense of the headlines. Until then, take care of one another, be kind to one another, try not to get too emotionally agitated. And if you want to hear more long-form thoughts from me, I recommend that you join my newsletter, which is at thatskaizen.substack.com. I'm going to type that in the chat in case you're not already signed up for that. And there I post weekly to bi-weekly thoughts on issues like the Epstein case. Highly recommend you sign up there, because that's the best way for me to make sure that you don't miss anything that I post. Bye-bye. Have a good Monday. See ya.